Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Health Tech with Purpose podcast. Today's guest we have is Nathan Price from Thorne, Chief Scientific Officer and a beloved friend. Welcome to the show, Nathan. How are you doing?
Great to be with you, Ayush. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah. This podcast definitely took up some time to organize, but glad that we are having this conversation today because I was looking forward to learn so much from you, and I think today I get the best hour. So yeah, raring to go.
Looking forward to it.
Great. So Nathan, why not you start by giving a bit of background about your work and your passion areas, and let's start from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm primarily a scientist and a scientist that's gotten interested in the business world and translating and building things. So as background, so I have a PhD in bioengineering. This was building computer models of kind of how you take in all the food into your body and how do you make your cells and generate energy and things of that nature. And I'm very deep in an area called systems biology, which is trying to understand how all these biological components come together and how do we simulate them in computers and ask questions about what's happening at the molecular level and how does that impact your health in the long term. So my background then was I was a professor for several years at first at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in chemical engineering and at the Institute for Genomic Biology, then moved to be professor and then ultimately associate director at the Institute for Systems Biology with Lee Hood, who's was first a mentor and then a longtime partner on many things, which I'm sure we'll talk about. He and I wrote a book together called The Age of Scientific Wellness, which we published from Harvard this year. And I was a professor for about 15 years all in, and then transitioned to be into the private sector, first as co-CEO with Paul Jacobson of a company called Longevity. And then ultimately we merged that with Thorne to form Thorne HealthTech, which we IPO'd a couple years ago. And then ended up deciding we would go back private. And L. Catterton bought us a couple months ago and has taken us private. And I'm as currently the Chief Scientific Officer of Thorne HealthTech.
Great. Thank you for this lovely introduction, Nathan. I think you've set up the stage pretty nicely, providing a context to all the different experiences that you had. But one thing that really stands out and is of special interest to me has been, the precision medicine that you have been working on and the whole approach, the book that you wrote, The Age of Scientific Wellness, which discusses a lot of these ideas. So can you elaborate more about the precision medicine and the prevention intersection, how they all work together and the possibilities that you foresee and the challenges that you foresee?
Sure. So precision medicine is an area that a lot of people have been focused on. Barack Obama, when he was president, kind of brought it to prominence by mentioning it in the State of the Union as one of the goals in this space and so forth. And so it's really just the idea that so most of our medicines, and there's a quite a famous and somewhat controversial paper by a friend and colleague, Nick Shork, that goes through the top 10 selling drugs in the United States, and basically looks at statistics and says they work for 10% of people. So the best drugs work for about 1 in 4. And the worst drugs work for about 1 in 25. And these are your multi-billion-dollar drugs. And so we call this the era of imprecision medicine. And so you can get benefit, but it's not really highly tailored. And for any person, there's a lot going on in your body. There are a lot of complexities. There's lots of contingencies. And so precision medicine is the movement. First and foremost, it's represented by this phrase, the right drug to the right patient at the right time. And that's an important endeavor. And we've done lots of papers and lots of work to target that. Now, when we start talking about scientific wellness, like we call it in the book, or you could also call it precision health to mirror precision medicine, what we're saying here is that that's not enough, because precision medicine is important, but you start by saying the right drug at the right time to the right person. So you've already assumed that it's a drug that will be the answer, and that's very often not true. And if you're thinking more about, and one of the other issues is that you're intervening into healthcare much too late. Like if you're trying to take a drug to reconstitute your brain after you've lost a ton of it through, and tons of synapses and neurons have died, say, in advanced Alzheimer's disease. The notion that you're going to take a small molecule drug and regrow that, totally fanciful. Like, we have no clue how to do. Well, and it's not even that. You would need much more sophisticated strategies to have a chance of doing that. So the whole notion here then is, let's not wait till we're super late. Let's take the same type of deep science approaches, molecular understanding that we think about in precision medicine, but let's move it much, much earlier in precision health or scientific wellness, such that we say, how do we make it so that you don't get Alzheimer's at all? How do we, push your diabetes off way into the future? How do we eliminate cancers before they start? And so that's the whole notion of this precision prevention idea, which is stop disease before it starts. Don't wait until late, till you have symptoms, and reorient the healthcare system so that you're maximizing health span, the time that you spend healthy and vibrant and strong. And in fact, and I'll say one more thing, and then we can, I was going to give a lecture at RPI a week or so ago, and I was listening to a book, and it's not a recent book. It's the Moral Epistles by Seneca. So it was written 2,000 years ago. And what was really, not recent. And what was actually fascinating as I was listening to it were two things. One is he started talking about longevity. And the way he put it is, he says, the real key is that you want to extend your life and not your death. And I thought that was the perfect encapsulation of what we mean in scientific wellness, which is, you want to extend your life, not your death. Treating Alzheimer's after it's really advanced, that's extending your death. Stopping it is extending your life. So that's one. And then I have to just say one other thing about the book, because it was just amazing. The other thing these letters that he gives to his young protege, right? And so to Lucretius. And so anyway, he's giving these letters, and he starts giving him some health advice. And he strongly recommends periodic fasting. And I just thought, given the moment that we have in wellness now, like, we've advanced so terribly far, because now we have intermittent fasting, and they used to have only periodic fasting.
This is 2,000 years old, you said.
Wow. 2,000 years. And so technology's changed dramatically, right? The capabilities we have now are radically different, but what humans want has changed basically nothing. So there's this really interesting intersection between the things that we want. We want health, happiness, relationships, all the things that are just have not changed in 2,000 years. And a couple of the tools haven't changed, periodic fasting to intermittent fasting. But then you have all these modern technologies that say, okay, can we achieve a lot of these things that we really desire, but at a level that was impossible before because of all this technological?
That sounds so true. Great. No, that's good. Okay, cool. So let's go level deeper, Nathan, talking more about the precision prevention. So one of the key ideas, mentioned in your book is about the digital twin future. So tell us more about what that entails, and, maybe piggyback on what you already shared. And how it all works, and the practical aspect of it, what are you really looking at 2030, 2040? How are you seeing it shape up?
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of technologies that have advanced a lot and that are quite new now. So digital twins is the notion that you can represent your own personal biology in a computer simulation, and that's advancing to different levels. We can't fully do that yet, but I'll argue that the first iterations of this are really coming online now, including one that we've done for brain health that I'll talk about for a moment. So the reason you want these digital twins is because you want to run the calculation or give yourself the best estimate of what's the best thing for you. So we talked about those drugs, right? They only work for a small percentage of people. So you'd really like to know, is that you or is it not? If it's you, maybe that's the strategy. If it's not, don't. Lifestyle interventions, things that you could do to put off disease. So for example, we've spent the last 3 years at Thorne HealthTech and working with, with a partner of ours. that basically goes through and has built a model of how does the brain maintain health. So you're building all these complex um, feedback loops and pathways and networks, and you're building a serious simulator based on ordinary differential equations and Bayesian networks. I won't get into all the details, but it's a sophisticated model. Takes information from about 1,000 different papers, and but then on top of that, every person is individualized because they have different genetics, which affects the rates at which these processes happen, different lifestyle, different diet, different whatever. And you can put this all into these simulations. And what it does is it then computes a probability of lifetime cognitive health on a year by year basis. And you can update it with new measurements. The more measurements you have, the tighter those predictions get. But what it can do is then, given information from blood, from genetics, from a questionnaire, to get information about lifestyle and so forth, you can get a probabilistic measure of the likely onset of dementia for one, in one of these cases, and also a set of personalized recommendations with the number of years that likelihood can be pushed into the future. There's a ton of data that goes behind this. But what it then says is that you can do personalized plans. And in some cases, you can push this off, 10 plus years. Not everyone has kind of a different size envelope based on their genetics and kind of predispositions and so forth. But you can go out and get kind of as much of the brain health that we know how to do. And so the digital twin model, I think, is incredibly fascinating that way, because you are able to do those, even sort of counterfactuals, like what happens if I do scenario A, what happens if I do scenario B, and one of the things I really want to emphasize, since we've built this around brain health. So we started by studying health, and then only afterwards do you lay on the disease part. So then you say, the brain's got to maintain energy. How does it do that? What impairs that? It's got to take out the garbage on a nightly basis. What does that do? How do you impair that? Anyway, on and on and on. And so that is a capability that I think is really revolutionary. And we foresee this happening, in brain, in skin, in metabolic health, in aging, and so forth, so that you start having many more of these. And it's not just us working on it, it's a whole, community that is. And so it will become much more commonplace for individuals as they go into their doctor to expect. And I think within 5 years or so, we should really expect this, that when you come in, that there is in fact a simulation that's tailored to a reasonable degree to your biology that's helping to guide your health.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, see a lot of startups and some very revolutionary companies working in this space. So, what do you see as major challenges or major differentiators in approach? If you were to make a commentary, for the businesses that are in digital twin health, the digital twin.
Yeah, and there's a number of approaches that are being taken. So I think that one of the big differentiators, and I'm going to just give my, others can have different views on this, but the path that we're really following, one is this focus on first understanding health and not starting with disease. I think there's very much a notion of people go out and they say, oh, I'm going to build an Alzheimer's model, I'm going to build a diabetes model. And I think that's the wrong way. I think we want to understand, how does the brain stay healthy? How is our metabolic system supposed to work? How is our skin supposed to? And you first build that out in tons of detail. So it's a ton of focus first on homeostasis and what I would call a scientific wellness approach. First, understand health. And in fact, I was on a panel right before the pandemic with the emeritus chairman at Harvard Medical School, and he put this in a way I really love. So he's let me quote this kind of ever since. But he said, healthcare is the only industry that does not study its own gold standard, which is wellness. So that's the first thing. First, understand how the body works. That's a big piece. Second aspect that I think is really important is to focus. Well, it helps you focus then on causality. And so you're putting together these feedback loops. It gives you a framework for what to understand. And I think that's so important to do before you start doing massive machine learning across this stuff. I'm a big fan of machine learning and AI and all those things. But I think starting from where you have a framework, this made a huge difference. And I'm going to give one of the plenary talks at this at an NIH meeting on combination therapies and Alzheimer's next week. And there is and one of the things that really comes to be, critically important is that you need to understand before you're just analyzing these massive amounts of data, what it actually means. And when you build this system of health, what it lets you do is you can see these molecular patterns that you machine learn. If you don't have that whole digital twin, it's kind of hard to know. And I serve on all these advisory boards, and we've been going through all this multi-omic data for a variety of different diseases. And it's so hard because you see the pattern. It's like, okay, I can see that it's different. You get p-values and statistics and machine learning. But once you have this framework, you say, oh, it's interfering with this pathway, it downregulates it by this amount, and then you can compute what that means to the patient. So in the brain health model, you do this and you say, oh, wow, they're going to get Alzheimer's 5 years earlier because of this. And it's like, oh, wow, okay, we should really do something about that. So you need that framing. So the other area that I think is really challenging here is there's a temptation, and I think a lot of people are going down the route, and it is a big temptation to just gather as much of just massive data and just machine learn it to, like crazy. But I
It's
think
more
when you
like
do that,
putting technology. Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, I would say that it's more about using technology on the solution rather than finding the solution and then using technology. So they are more like sitting on a technology and trying to just glue
Yeah, I
it
think you
somewhere.
want to from both sides. That
Yeah.
said, the machine learning, especially once you have these, these maps of what you think is causal and driving, is that it can point you to new pieces, right? Pieces that you've neglected or that you've missed. Or the other aspect of building these that's amazing is that it forces you to build your whole conception of a disease into one cohesive whole. And so what often happens if you don't do this, then you may have ideas in your head that you don't understand are totally contradictory. You believe A and B about the disease, and you don't understand. And for Alzheimer's, I think this has been a huge one. So, for many decades, the leading theory around Alzheimer's was it's caused by amyloid plaques, which is still repeated a lot these days, which I think is not true. And one of the things is when you start building these cohesive models, we found it to be impossible to find a way to make amyloid plaques causal such that the dynamics of what we understand about how amyloid plaques form and at what time scale and at what rate could mesh with the level at which Alzheimer's disease itself progresses. Because if the plaque formation was really the driver, it should go a lot faster. And so anyway, and there's many other pieces of counter evidence, which I'm not getting into here, but but that's one piece. Like if you don't understand that those things don't mesh together unless you're really trying to build it into a whole. And there's many examples of that kind of thing.
Right. And one of the works pattern that I also, kept coming in your conversations and your passion areas is the concept of microbiome. So tell us more about that, and how does that fit into the future of longevity and wellness?
Yeah, the microbiome is hugely important because every single thing basically that you take into your body, whether it's a drug, a supplement, food, all can be modified by the microbiome. So, there was an estimate, there was a Cell paper a couple years ago, and it was the first big estimate of this, but it looks like about 13% of drugs are metabolized away by the microbiome. It's got to be similar kind of things for, supplements and natural products, perhaps even more so. One that's really interesting is phosphatidylcholine. So phosphatidylcholine, if I go back to the digital twin model and we're simulating health, it's one of the really important compounds for prevention. People that eat diets rich in phosphatidylcholine get Alzheimer's 3 years later. And in our simulations, we actually show that it becomes rate limiting for people as you get into low oxygen states later in your life. So it's important. But If you have certain kinds of bacteria, they will actually eat phosphatidylcholine and they will turn it into something called trimethylamine, which your liver turns into TMAO, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So you could be aiming, so this is where precision health comes out, right? You could be aiming to improve your brain health in an important way, I would argue, and you would instead be taking something that's bad. And so you
Right.
would want to, yeah.
Right. And
Anyway,
also, yeah, I've seen this being a problem for patients with chronic illness. So let's say if you're diabetic, you are continuously taking a certain medicine. And this happened in my family that, and ending up, let's say, ruining the functioning of another organ, for example. So,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And it's largely a black box because like trials that are done now, drug companies don't technically have to look at the microbiome, but it's partly one of the explanations, for why does the drug not work for everybody? Well, there's many reasons for that. It can be genetic, but one reason is the microbiome. Right? Could be that the microbiome is getting. So a paper we did with Sean Gibbons at Institute for Systems Biology, fabulous colleague I've had for many years. And so we took data from thousands of people, and we looked at the relationship between the microbiome and, in this case, statins, right? Because statins are, so many people take them. And it turns out that if you look at the kind of microbiome that you have, some individuals, if they have a microbiome, and this one was characterized by high degrees of bacteroides, they get double the benefit of taking a statin in terms of lowering LDL cholesterol than people that have different kinds of microbiomes. We also, though, looked at one of the big side effects. And one of the big side effects of statins is you get a nearly 10% increase in the rate of diabetes on statins. So we again looked at the microbiomes, and they were predictive. There were 4 groups that we broke them into. 2 of them saw significant elevation of diabetes markers on the statins, but 2 of the groups saw none. So one hypothesis that comes out of this is you might be able to shift your microbiome in ways that to balance both making the microbiome more efficacious and also making it less likely to treat diabetes. Now, those things are not totally uncoupled. The group that was the highest in terms of lowering LDL cholesterol was also part of the group that reacted from for the diabetes. And this is, again, what precision health is all about, because you often come into cases where there are, trade-offs. And so you have to know, like from your genome or other data, like what are you most at risk for? And then you can make your trade-offs in the way that is informed by the kind of things that you would be most at risk for, so you can lower those. So there's just many, many, many things you can go down, many rabbit holes that we could see
So that,
for the
yeah, it definitely makes me very curious, especially as an outsider, trying to understand. So what comes to mind is that, of course, precision, as a, I'd say, layman analogy, it would basically be equivalent to a custom medicine as compared to, the generic. So if I were to think that custom is always a bit more costly or requires more, like operations on the back end, rather than, let's say, what we can compare with, say, fast food or say standard sizing of all. So there's a reason that the whole industry looks for more sizing because more volumes and stuff like that. So do you see that as a challenge for precision medicine, like the amount of customization, the amount of precision that is required to make it really effective? And if yes, then why? And if no, then why?
Yeah, it is definitely an issue, because you're exactly right. And industries want to do things that they can, do at significant scale.
Yes, yeah.
So now that said, I do think there are ways around this. So if we look at Thorne, and there was a reason that I, decided to take this job and look at things. So one area is when we're talking about precision prevention, so we tend to move away from drugs for one thing, because drugs tend to have, side effects, and it's a pretty big kind of intervention. Some of them are safer than others, of course, but most of us try to avoid that for most of our lives. And so that shifted us much more towards, obviously, lifestyle intervention. That's kind of always the base, right? Your look at what you're doing in your life and can you make that better. And it also has led to a more focus on natural products that tend to have very low toxicity. And so Thorne, for example, makes about 300 different SKUs, about 180 different compounds, for example. And that's, of course, only one piece of this very large industry. But one of the nice things in the natural product space is that you can do lots of mixing and matching. So manufacturing, it might just be, right, you manufacture a bottle of phosphatidylcholine or vitamin D or berberine or quercetin or whatever, whatever. But at the level of the person, it's really about, what's valuable to them, right? Some of these things are not valuable to them, right? They'd have no need for it. Others, it can make a huge difference. And it's that information piece. So I think we can separate a lot of, large scale manufacturing of what are, like, sometimes I like to think about this from the an analogy to music, right? So each product or each thing that you have is like a key on a keyboard, but what should be happening for you is the music, right? It's the melody, it's the timing and spot that we can deliver through AIs or working with providers. We do work with about 50,000 healthcare providers. So, there's different ways that can manifest in a person's life. And it's the combinations of everything that really become personalized. Like, what do you need at this point in your life? What's the thing that you're struggling with? Do you have acid reflux? Are you, is your skin blotching? Is your memory not feel like it's slipping? Whatever it is, whatever you're dealing with, that's the thing that you kind of want to get at. And then especially getting towards this, notion of scientific wellness, which is, can I optimize my health? How good am I at clearing oxidative radicals out of my body? How good is my immune system like primed? Of course, with COVID, we got this, massive moment when everyone all of a sudden started really focusing on that. Oh, is my immune system really pumped up and ready? I don't want to deal with that after I get horribly sick. I want to, not get sick. And anyway, all those kind of things.
Great. Nice, nicely explained, I would say, rather, because definitely makes so much sense. And I believe, coming from, someone with your credibility, where you have spent so much of your life, building the solutions out of this opportunity that, if true, changes the way humankind would basically approach medicine. So that's applauding. So one of the things, and I'd say what makes your journey unique, Nathan, is definitely the journey that you took from academia to industry and transitioning from, from teaching to founding companies and so on. So I think that, if we have more such transitions, it would be so good overall. So, I would like you to share, some of the key learnings, especially for individuals bridging the gap between academia and industry, the opportunities that exist, and how to make that transition. Any of your personal stories that stand out during this transition, please go ahead and share.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just personally, I think I'm really interested. I'm very interested in creation, and I'm very interested in kind of the cutting edge of technology. There's a phrase from Stuart Kaufman that I really like, where he talks about the adjacent possible. And the adjacent possible is a very interesting notion, right? Because if you just think about the sum total of human knowledge, right, it's like a balloon expanding, right? And the surface area is kind of what comes next. Like if you could be transported back in the past 1,000 years, no matter how smart you are, there's no way that you would build the computer we're talking on, right? Because there's just too many other things that are necessary, right? It's not in the adjacent possible. So one of the things I think is so interesting is to just focus on, whatever your piece of the world is. And it's what I try to do in my piece of the world. What has happened to what's in the adjacent possible this year that wasn't in it last year? And what is it that you can do? This year is kind of obvious, right? You look at ChatGPT or something, the large language models, and the whole world is going through a moment like that. So that's a bit of a preamble. So for me, I find a lot of joy on the academic side and the industry side and so forth. It's just sort of where you're at on that spectrum, because it takes a lot to go from that initial idea learn something that no one has ever known before, build something that no one has ever built before, and get it into the lives of people, right? And there's so much work and so much that goes into it along that line. And I think one of the big differences in academia and industry, so academia, you spend most of your time on the ideas, right? So you kind of find an idea, you publish a paper, you may spin
Right.
out a company on it, right, and sit on it like sometimes you do, but even that's going into industry, right? But in pure academia, you're kind of idea, I learn the new thing, I publish it, I go on to the new idea, I learn it, I publish it. And there's a certain joy to that because you learn a lot and you have tons of ideas and it's really fun. I think the industry side though, obviously what you end up doing is, you get the idea, but there's so much in execution, right? And industry ideas are cheap, execution is everything. And it says, okay, I got to bring this into the world. So sometimes I feel like I'm talking to my academic colleagues. They're like, well, what are you working on? I'm like, well, I'm working on what I did last year still, because there's a long way to go. We got to get this, you know, and so, but there is a niceness to it. Like, the digital twins is one thing, for example, like the science of that. And I didn't really get into how much it has changed my view of what's going on in Alzheimer's, which is totally, but that wasn't the path that I went down this time, but massively so. But I would sit there and really focus on that. But now there's so many other things. It's like, okay, if I want to get this to be a tool and have it make an impact, which I actually believe it could do, to lower the dementia, I hope eventually for millions of people. Okay, well, I've got to figure out, the regulatory structure. How do I get this out? Partnerships with healthcare systems,
Right.
working with patients, setting an ecosystem, just on and on and on. And
Mhm.
but the rewards of if you can do that are very satisfying because you can say, all right, have we materially impacted
Making
that
an impact.
terrible tick of Alzheimer's and other related dementias that are happening? And you can't actually get there unless you build that out. Now you can do that from academia, like you can have an influence on other people, but eventually you have to build that out. And so for me personally, I just became really interested in this space. And in fact, the way that it happened for me was I was very happy as in academia. I was running a lab joint with Lee Hood, who had been a longtime hero of mine. For listeners that don't know, Lee is an incredibly eminent scientist. He won the National Medal of Science from President Obama, amongst many,
Now,
many other things. But he is, Scientific American, I think, listed him as one of the top 5 living people in biotechnology. I mean, he's really a legend. And so working, we have, we had our 2 lab groups had merged together to form this kind of super lab that we were running and trying to drive medicine and all the stuff we talk about in our book that we wrote the book together. And so, and I got a call from Paul Jacobson, who's, the CEO of Thorne. And it was interesting because he kind of spun me because I was pretty much prepared to, I was like, yeah, it's nice. And, you guys are doing interesting things, but I was planning to say no. And then, and it kind of spun me because one thing he said, and gets to the academia industry, but at least what he said to me is he said, you know what the problem is with you academics? And I've already said what I love about academia. So this is apply to everyone. But what he said at the time was, it's like you want to have your finger in so many pies and you can't see the one huge opportunity that is staring you in the face. And then what he told me was that he said, you've done all this great science, you've proven all these things, you've built this whole area of scientific wellness. But he says, if you really want to impact the world, you need to take all of this and turn it into one thing and make it actually work, be economically viable and scalable and build it into something that will really transform the world. It's like you want to change, healthcare, you want to change the way that the trajectory of how we deal with disease, because as we've talked about, I think we can do radically better. It's like you want to do that, you've got to do the hard work and pull that all together and make it something that's viable in the world. And I found that an irresistible pitch at the end of the day, where it was the notion that I felt like if I didn't try, I would really regret it, because my academic career was going fabulously well. It was, cruising along. We had an amazing lab, all those kind of things. Um, and so that's what really got me into, the partnership with Paul, because I wanted to see, and he was kind of like, you run science and and he'll run business, and we'll build the greatest healthy aging company in the history of the world. The kind of stuff you tell to yourself at the beginning of ventures, right? A lot to prove, and you just kind of want to go for something exciting. And so that was, kind of where I'd like to get into.
Right, right. No, I can totally sense that wouldn't have been an easy decision. Counting your future on a new kid on the block. So yeah.
Yeah.
Good. And I think that's something very much usually associated with academicians, that they don't make those transitions or decisions fast enough. So I think you did well there. Great.
Yeah, and I'd been interested in this area. We didn't talk about it, but I had co-founded a previous company called Aravale with Lee Hood, and so we had, that one ended up not making it economically, but we learned a absolute ton from it. We talk about that a lot in the book too, because you know most of the people that went through there, gave permission for their de-identified data to be used for research purposes, which was amazing. It led to an incredible number of discoveries. You probably have 25 or 30 high profile papers that came out of that over the last few years, and so yeah, I think just straddling this, this either for those people that stay in academia, spin out companies, and be these giant innovation hubs, which I think is an incredibly exciting thing, or for individuals that actually jump in and say, okay, we're going to try to build out the companies, and or individuals that jump back and forth. So there's a lot of things to do.
Yeah, yeah, great. But yeah, it feels so great, looking back at the journey and how it has evolved. Great. So, talking about past, let's talk about the future. So, what's Nathan 2.0 or 3.0? So, what's coming up next? Can some of the plans that you can share? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think things that I'm really excited about, one is the expansion of this digital twin technology and getting it deeply into, working with healthcare providers, with individuals, and just trying to make it so much more transparent. Because I think we've learned so much about how you can go about precision health and scientific wellness, but there is a lot of complexity in there. And I just want to take that burden off of the individual, right? We've got to get it into the algorithms, the tools, make it as simple and engaging as possible for people to have, this deep access. And I really think that the future is the convergence of, at least in this space, is the convergence of three big trends. One is the multi-omics, so the ability to make large scale measurements cheaply and easily. We have a device, for example, called the Nano Drop, which lets us get, virtually painless at home blood collection. We did the microbiome wipe to make the microbiome collection easy. And there's a lot of people in this space, right? But basically, how do we make these measurements, the multi-omics, get that serious scale? That's the first big piece. The second one are, the understanding what those mean for health, which I really see centered on the digital twins that we've talked about quite a bit today. And then the third, I think, is really the deliverable of personalized information informed by those two things, with the capabilities of the large language models and AIs and things like this. Because the ability to give personalized content and understanding at any level in plain English or whatever language you speak, like that is insanely great, right? That is an incredible capability now. So I think you take those three things, you get to a future of personalization that was unimaginable like 5 years ago.
Right. So I think I'll sum it like, things that you have been working on eventually falling into place.
I think those things converge together in a big way. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So thank you so much, Nathan, for your time. And this has been a wonderful conversation, plenty of learnings, especially for anybody looking forward to revolutionize the precision medicine and the way things work in the future around longevity and care and wellness. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Yeah.
Thanks, Ayush. Wonderful to be with you.